What is up guys, Andy Forrestine Runner here, and today I'm going to be giving you guys my top 5 tips on how you can build in race specific training into your running plan. So we all know how important it is to get to the starting line of our goal races in as best shape and as healthy as possible. But sometimes one of the biggest things that we all overlook is being race specific in our training. There's so many great training plans out there, but a lot of them are very, very generic. And if they're not tailored to the race that we're going to be running, then we could be left a little bit shortchanged when we get onto that starting line. So today I want to go through with you guys, as I said, my top 5 tips that I've been using over the years, and in particular really dialing into over this recent half marathon training block, as I am just under 4 weeks out from the Forest of Dean Spring Trails Half Marathon. So if you're excited for today's video guys, make sure you give it a like, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel for weekly running content, and without further ado, let's jump in to point number 1. So the first point that I want to cover, and probably the most obvious of the 5, is you need to look at your goal race. What are you going to be training for? And you need to try and find similar terrain to train on. If you can't find similar terrain, for example, I'm running the Forest of Dean Spring Trails Half Marathon, I have the trails on my doorstep, but if I was running a road marathon or a road half marathon and I only had trails, or vice versa, if I only had roads around me and no trails, then the next best thing to look at is to try and look at the elevation profile of the course that you're going to be running and try and mimic that in your surrounding area. Failing that, of course, you're going to have to use the dreaded treadmill. Don't be afraid to use the treadmill. It's not something I particularly use because I'm lucky enough to live in an area where I have all types of terrain around me, but I know a lot of people live in urban areas and hills and trails are not very accessible. So treadmill in that situation can be your friend. You want to start looking around at the type of sections, breaking your race up into sections, looking at specific areas, miles 1 to 4 maybe, miles 5 to 8, looking at the structure and maybe trying to build up some loops and some routes around your location where you can train on something similar to get used to how your legs are going to be feeling on race day. So that is tip number 1. The tip number 2 is going to be adapting your specific training workouts to cater for the race coming up. So for example, the race that I am going to be running is a rather hilly race. It's not particularly hilly, but it's certainly not flat, and I'm going to be dealing with a lot of undulation from mile 1 right through to mile 13.1. So I've been adapting a lot of my workouts recently, as you guys might have seen in my weekly training vlogs, to cater for that. I've not really done a lot of flat speed work. I've done a few workouts here and there, but a lot of my tempo runs and a lot of my interval work has been done on rolling trails to try and mimic the type of terrain that I'm going to be running on. So it very closely follows on from point number 1, but then with that you need to adapt your workout. So for example, because I'm running a half marathon, I'm trying to do things like, in the beginning of my plan, 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off on rolling terrain, and then I'm progressing those intervals to maybe 4 minutes, and then of course mile repeats and 2 mile repeats, and doing longer stretches of tempo runs on the rolling trail. So if it was a bit more mountainous, for example, if there was going to be a lot more hills than there are, a little bit less runnable, a little bit more walkable, a little bit more maybe ultra mountainous style, then I'd adapt my training again to do maybe some more specific hill reps, find some steeper gradients, and start to train a little bit more specifically. Likewise, if you're training on fast and flat, then you want to adapt those workouts to doing things like 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, or mile repeats, 2 mile repeats like I've been doing, but on flatter roads, to try and get your body used to running at that pace into a rhythm, getting yourself a bit metronomical like a metronome and just ticking along. So it's all about creating and adapting the workouts that you're going to be doing and trying molding them into the course that you're going to be running. So the third point that I want to make, a little bit similar to point number 1, but we're going to expand on it a little bit, is to get access to the course elevation profile if you can, and then make specific routes, specific training runs that mimic those elevation profiles, and from there then you want to segment and phase your training specifically. So just to give you a bit of an example, because that I do understand is a little bit of a mouthful. In the beginning I did sort of 3 or 4 weeks worth of base training. In fact, I did that before Christmas. I did literally 5 weeks of base training, easy running, and then as the new year progressed I started to throw throw in a few tempo runs into the latter stages of the base training. Then, when I started my specific training for this half marathon, I got the base phase, that's the first phase, done and dusted, and then I started to work on the shorter, sharper reps, the stuff, the top end speed, shall we say, for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. And then in this last phase 3, before we get to the final tapering stage, I'm working on more race specific pace, longer intervals, tempo runs, things that are going to get me a little bit more dialed in to the race specific environment. So you can see there I've built it up into phases, and what I did along those phases is in that first section I took the 3 minutes on and by 2 minutes off, and I was doing a lot of those on the rolling terrain, trying to get my legs working really quickly up and down hills. And then from there into the third phase, where I'm doing a little bit more race specific stuff, I'm trying to take it still on the hillier terrain, but trying to run a little bit more on the course profile, whereas in the beginning some of the hills were a little bit more steeper than what I will be running in the race. So I was trying to work it so that in the beginning I was doing harder efforts past the base phase, then harder efforts on steeper terrain, and now when I'm getting a little bit more race specific, starting to work on dialing in to that race specific pace on terrain that is very, very similar to what I'm going to be running on. And tip number 4, guys, is all about the mental side. Tip number 4 is critical. Tip number 4 for me is something that I do quite a lot. Maybe sometimes I overthink it, I've got to put my hands up to it, but it is about making a mental plan of how the race is going to pan out. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, what's key here, and a big point to note, is not to stress too much, because ultimately we don't know how we're going to feel when we hit that start line until the day of the race. But if you have some kind of plan in your head as to how you want to approach the race, then it does tend to make things easier, especially if all of the stars align on that particular day and you have the race of your life, because you're going to know what you need to do. Now, I must stress at this point to say to you that if things don't go to plan, you need to be strong-willed enough not to let that bring you down and ruin your race. But for me, what it's allowed me to do is I've been recently, especially over the last 6 to 12 months, studying course profiles, going out there and saying, today I'm going to run strong. I'm not going to set myself a time goal, but today I'm going to run strong. And by that, what I've done is I have assessed the course profile. I've seen where the hills are, I have seen where the downs are and where the flat is. I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses. For me personally, I'm a very much stronger, flat, faster runner than I am on the hills. Hills are just my enemy. That's why I try and work on them so much. I'm so much slower. I always get overtaken on hills, and I always go back past people on the downs and the flats. So I have been putting a plan together in my head of the Forest of Dean half marathon, where the hills are, where I'm going to be pushing. Give you a quick example. The Forest of Dean half marathon basically goes mile 1 flat, mile 2 very, very steep downhill. Then from miles 3 to mile 7, you're on a continual gradual incline. So there's a good 4 or 5 mile stretch there where you are always climbing. The odd break, and it's not a massive climb, but you are always going uphill. So I know at that point in my head straight away that I need to go out strong in miles 1 and 2, practicing on the downhill so I don't blow out my quads, which is exactly what I've been doing in the workouts. And then 3 to 7, I need to stay strong, be a little bit conservative, because I know that from mile 7 to mile 9, there's a good flat and downhill section where I can really kick on. And then I have to dig deep for the final couple of miles, whilst there is more uphill than downhill. So putting that mental plan together in my head already allows me to know where I'm going to intend on pushing, where I'm going to be playing it a little bit safe, to ensure that I have the energy to finish strong like I have been over my last few races. So if you guys can put together some kind of mental plan, it really, really helps. My 5th and final tip, guys, is if possible, make sure you practice and train on the race course itself. If it's your local race that you're doing that you really want to target, like I have got now, it's really accessible for me to go and train on the course. But of course, I appreciate if you're going traveling, then it's not quite as easy to practice on the race course. But obviously, following on from trying to mimic and mock certain sections of the course within your training from the earlier points, if you can actually get onto the course and train, then it will just give you the best and most invaluable experience that you just cannot get if you are not practicing on the course. For me personally, if I cannot get to a course, I will scour the internet and YouTube for race videos to see if anyone else has been out there. Like myself, love to record race videos, has been out there and filmed any of the course, so I can get a bit of an idea as to what I'm going to be tackling when I'm there. If you've already got mental pictures and mental milestones because you've already been out on the course, and it makes racing so much easier. So that, guys, is tip number 5. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed those top 5 tips on how you guys can build some more race-specific training and incorporate them into your running plan. Just remember, I'm not a coach. This is all just from personal learning, and hoping to share some of these tips with you might make you a little bit better prepared for your next upcoming race. So if you enjoyed today's video, guys, make sure you give it a like, share it with your friends. Of course, do consider subscribing to the channel for weekly running content. And without further ado, I'll see you on the next one. Until then,